Deep in the sun-scorched Iraqi desert, at the ancient ruins of Tel Yeremia, a chilling mystery unfolds. Louise Leidner, a woman haunted by ghostly letters and a shadowy past, is found murdered in her locked bedroom, door bolted, window barred, no way in or out. Enter Hercule Poirot, the brilliant detective whose sharp mind unravels a web of deception, love, and betrayal. Was it a vengeful ghost from her past, or a killer hiding among the dig's tight-knit team? In a race against time, Poirot uncovers a shocking truth. The man she loved, her husband, is a master of disguise, orchestrating a deadly masquerade to bury his secrets forever. Prepare for a tale of treachery where no one is what they seem. Chapter 1. The dust of Tel Yaremjuth's sun hung like a molten disk above the desolate plains of Iraq, casting a merciless glare over the sprawling ruins of Tel Yeremia. I, Amy Leatherin, a nurse of some 30 years' experience, stepped from the rattling motorcar that had carried me from Baghdad, my sensible shoes sinking slightly into the powdery earth. The archaeological expedition, under the direction of Dr. Eric Leidner, was a world apart from the starched wards of London hospitals. Mounds of excavated earth dotted the landscape, and the faint clink of shovels mingled with the dry wind. I had been summoned to care for Dr. Leidner's wife, Louise, said to be in delicate health, though the details were vague. A nervous condition, the agency had hinted, requiring a firm hand and a steady nerve. The expedition house, a low mud brick structure with a flat roof, squatted uninvitingly amidst the ruins. A young man, Mr. Carey, the expedition's architect, greeted me with a curt nod, his sunburned face lined with fatigue. He led me inside, where the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of kerosene. The living quarters were sparse, but orderly, a long table cluttered with maps and pottery shards, a few creaking chairs, and a shelf of well-worn books. The team, I learned, was a small one: Dr. Leidner, a lean scholarly man with piercing blue eyes, his wife Louise, Miss Ann Johnson, the expedition's secretary, Mr. Joseph Mercado, an excitable assistant, and Father Livigny, a French monk, with a passion for ancient scripts. Louise Leidner awaited me in a shaded corner of the courtyard, her beauty striking even in the harsh light. She was perhaps 35, with hair the color of ripe wheat, and eyes that seemed to hold a secret storm. Her smile was warm but fleeting, like a candle flame in a draught. "Nurse Leatherin," she said, her voice low and musical, "I'm so glad you've come. I haven't been myself." Her hands twisted a silk handkerchief, and I noticed a tremor in her fingers. Dr. Leidner appeared at her side, his manner tender but watchful, like a man guarding a fragile treasure. "My wife needs rest," he said softly, "and someone too. Keep her steady." That evening, as the team gathered for a simple meal of lamb and flatbread, I observed them closely. Miss Johnson, a wiry woman with a sharp tongue, spoke briskly of cataloging finds but avoided Louise's gaze. Mr. Mercado, his dark eyes darting, chattered about a newly uncovered tablet, though his laughter rang hollow. Father Livigny, serene in his black robes, offered a blessing in accented English, his calm demeanor a contrast to the undercurrent of unease. Louise ate little, her eyes flitting to the shadowed corners of the room. After dinner, she drew me aside, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nurse, I've been seeing things, faces at my window, letters in my own hand that I didn't write. I think someone here wishes me harm." I reassured her, as my training dictated, but her words lodged in my mind like a splinter. The house felt oppressive, its thick walls seeming to trap secrets as much as heat. Later, as I settled into my small room, I heard footsteps outside, soft, deliberate, then gone. I peered through the slatted window, but the desert night revealed nothing but stars and the endless, whispering sand. Sleep came uneasily, and I wondered what shadows lurked in the heart of Tel Yeremjuth. Chapter 2. The locked room. The scream tore through the stillness of Telluremia at precisely 10 minutes past noon. A sound so raw and piercing that it seemed to shake the very dust from the mud brick walls. I, Amy Leatherin, had been in the courtyard, sorting through a tray of medical supplies under the relentless Iraqi sun, when the cry stopped me cold. It came from the direction of Louise Leidner's bedroom, a small, shaded chamber at the far end of the expedition house. My nurse's instincts propelled me forward, my sensible shoes pounding the packed earth as I ran, heedless of the heat or the startled glances of the workers scattering pottery shards in their haste. The door to Louise's room was shut, the heavy wooden panel unyielding when I tried the handle. It was locked, a fact that sent a chill through me despite the midday blaze. "Mrs. Leidner," I called, hammering on the door. No answer came, only a dreadful silence that seemed to mock my efforts. Mr. Carey, the expedition's architect, appeared at my side, his lean frame taut with alarm. "What's happened?" he demanded, his voice rough. Before I could reply, Miss Ann Johnson, the sharp-tongued secretary, joined us, her face pale beneath her sunburn. "Break it down," she snapped, her usual composure fraying. "Mr. Mercado." The nervous assistant arrived next, his hands trembling as he fumbled with a crowbar from the dig site. With a splintering crash, the lock gave way, and we stumbled into the room. The sight that met us was one I shall never forget. Louise lay sprawled across the narrow bed, her golden hair fanned out like a halo, her face frozen in a mask of terror. Blood pooled beneath her head, stark against the white linen, and beside her, on the floor, lay a heavy clay statuette, its base stained crimson. The air was thick with the metallic temps of blood, and the barred window, tightly shut, admitted only slivers of light that danced mockingly across the scene. I knelt beside her, my training overriding my shock, but a single touch confirmed what my eyes already knew. Louise was dead, her skull crushed by a single brutal blow. Dr. Eric Leid burst into the room, his scholarly calm shattered. "Louise," he cried, falling to his knees beside her. His hands hovered over her body, as if afraid to touch the reality of her death. His grief was palpable, yet there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something I couldn't name that set my nerves on edge. Miss Johnson turned away, her hand pressed to her mouth, while Mr. Mercado muttered incoherently, his eyes darting to the corners of the room. Father Lavigny, the monk, appeared last, his black robes a somber contrast to the chaos. He crossed himself, murmuring a prayer in French, his face unreadable. The room itself was a puzzle. The door, as I had found, was locked from the inside, the key still in the lock. The window, barred with iron rods, showed no signs of tampering. The dust on the sill lay undisturbed, save for a faint smudge near one corner, as if something had brushed against it. The room's sparse furnishings, a bed, a small table, a chair, and a wooden chest, offered no immediate clues. The statuette, a relic from the dig, was the only object out of place, its weight and solidity making it a grimly effective weapon. I noticed, too, a faint trail of dust on the floor, leading from the bed to the window, as if something heavy had been dragged across the tiles. Captain Maitland, the local police officer, arrived within the hour, his khaki uniform damp with sweat. He was a burly man with a walrus mustache and a manner that suggested he was more accustomed to settling disputes among merchants than unraveling a murder. He surveyed the scene with a frown, scratching notes in a battered notebook. "Locked. Room A," he muttered. "No one could have got in or out, looks like. Queer business." His questions to the team were perfunctory, and I could see his frustration mounting as Dr. Leidner, still dazed, offered little beyond broken murmurs of his wife's beauty and fragility. Miss Johnson, regaining her composure, suggested a thief from the nearby village, but Captain Maitland dismissed it. "No signs of forced entry," he said gruffly. "This was someone inside the house." The weight of that statement hung over us like the desert heat. The expedition house, with its small, insular community, felt suddenly claustrophobic, each face a mask hiding potential guilt. I recalled Louise's words from the previous night, her fear of a malevolent presence, the letters in her own hand, the face at her window. Had she known her killer? Had she sensed the danger closing in? I tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the practicalities of the moment, but the image of her lifeless form burned in my mind. Word was sent to Baghdad, and by the following afternoon, a motorcar arrived, kicking up clouds of dust. From it stepped a small, impeccably dressed man with a waxed mustache and eyes that gleamed with an almost predatory intelligence. "Mademoiselle Letherin," he said, bowing with a flourish, "I am Hercule Poirot. I understand you were close to the victim. You will be my eyes and ears, yes." His accent was pronounced, his manner theatrical, yet there was a quiet authority in his presence that commanded attention. Captain Maitland, visibly relieved, handed over the investigation with a grunt, muttering about fancy detectives from Europe. Poirot wasted no time. He entered Louise's room with the precision of a surgeon, his gloved hands hovering over the scene without touching. He examined the locked door, noting the key still in place, then turned to the window, his fingers tracing the bars. "Curious," he murmured, crouching to inspect the smudge on the sill. "This dust, it tells a story, does it not?" He straightened, his gaze sweeping the room, lingering on the trail of dust on the floor. "Something was moved here, mademoiselle, something heavy, perhaps to conceal a path." I mentioned the statuette, and he nodded, lifting it carefully. "With a handkerchief, a weapon of opportunity, or one chosen with care. We shall see." He questioned me first, his eyes never leaving my face as I recounted the events of the previous day. I told him of Louise's fears, the letters she claimed to have received, and the ghostly face at her window. Poirot's eyebrows rose at this, but he said nothing, only nodding, as if fitting pieces into an invisible puzzle. He then called the others, one by one, to the living quarters, where he conducted his interviews with a disarming blend of courtesy and incisiveness. Dr. Leidner, still pale and shaken, spoke of his wife's nervous disposition, insisting she had no enemies. "She was sensitive," he said, his voice breaking. "She saw things, imagined things, perhaps." Mustache twitched. "Imagined, you say? Or was she made to imagine?" Miss Johnson, her sharp features drawn, admitted to hearing Louise argue with someone the previous week, though she couldn't identify the voice. She was upset, she said, talking about a mistake from her past. Mr. Mercado, sweating profusely, claimed to have been at the dig site all morning, a fact Mr. Carey corroborated with a reluctant nod. Father Lavigny.com, as ever, said he had been in his room, translating a cuneiform tablet, and had heard nothing until the scream. Poirot listened to each, his head tilted slightly, as if hearing not just their words but the silences between them. After the interviews, Poirot returned to the murder room, beckoning me to join him. He stood by the window, his fingers tapping lightly on the bars. "Mademoiselle, consider the problem," he said. "A locked door, a barred window, a woman dead within. Yet the killer left no trace except perhaps this dust." He pointed to the faint trail on the floor. "It suggests movement, purpose. The killer entered and left, but how? The answer lies not in magic, but in method." He knelt, examining the tiles, then rose with a small, satisfied smile. "The little gray cells, they begin to work." That evening, as the expedition gathered for a subdued meal, the atmosphere was thick with suspicion. Dr. Leidner ate nothing, his eyes fixed on the empty chair where Louise had sat. Miss Johnson's hands shook as she poured tea, and Mr. Mercathaw's nervous chatter filled the silence, though no one responded. Father Lavigny, serene as always, offered a quiet prayer, but his eyes flicked toward Poirot, who sat at the head of the table, sipping coffee and observing us all. "Tomorrow," he announced, "we shall dig deeper not into the earth, but into the truth. Someone in this house knows more than they say." As I retired to my room, the weight of the day pressed upon me. Louise's death, so sudden and brutal, seemed to cast a shadow over every face, every word. I locked my door, a precaution I hadn't thought necessary the night before, and checked the window's bars, finding them secure. Yet sleep eluded me. The desert wind whispered outside, carrying with it the echoes of Louise's fears. A face at the window, a letter in her own hand, a threat she could not escape. I wondered what Poirot saw in this locked room that I did not, and whether the truth, when unearthed, would be as stark and unforgiving as the Iraqi sun. Chapter 3. The Shadows of the Past. The morning after Louise Leidner's murder, the expedition house at Telluremia seemed to hold its breath, as if the very walls were wary of what secrets might be pried loose. I, Amy Leatherin, rose early, my sleep fractured by the memory of Louise's lifeless form and the piercing gaze of Hercule Poirot, who had arrived like a hawk amidst sparrows. The Iraqi sun was already climbing, its heat seeping through the mud-brick walls, and the air carried the dry, gritty scent of the desert. Outside, the dig site lay silent, the workers dismissed for the day by Dr. Leidner's orders, leaving only the faint rustle of wind over the ancient mounds. Poirot was up before the rest, his small figure immaculate in a linen suit, standing in the courtyard with a cup of black coffee, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Good morning, Mademoiselle Leatherin," he greeted me, his voice crisp despite the hour. "You have slept, I trust. The mind must be clear to see what the heart obscures." I confessed I had barely rested, and he nodded, as if expecting as much. "Today, we explore the past of Madame Leidner. The dead speak, if one listens." Breakfast was a strained affair. The team gathered around the long table in the living quarters, their faces drawn with fatigue and suspicion. Dr. Eric Leidner, his eyes red-rimmed, picked at his bread, his usual scholarly poise replaced by a hollow stillness. Miss Ann Johnson, her sharp features pinched, poured tea with mechanical precision, her gaze flicking to Poirot as if anticipating a challenge. Mr. Joseph Mercado, his nervous energy barely contained, spilled his coffee and apologized profusely, earning a curt glance from Mr. Carey, the architect, whose silence was as heavy as the heat. Father Lavigny, serene in his black robes, ate sparingly, his fingers occasionally tracing the cross at his chest. Poirot, seated at the head, observed them all, his mustache twitching like a cat's whiskers, sensing a storm. He began his inquiries with a disarming smile, addressing the group as one. "Mies Amos, the death of Madame Leidner is no accident, no whim of fate. To understand the crime, we must understand the woman. Tell me, what was she to you?" His question hung in the air, met with uneasy glances. Dr. Leidner spoke first, his voice low. "Louise was extraordinary, brilliant, sensitive, but troubled. She had a past, as we all do, but it was behind her." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Behind her, you say? And yet, Mademoiselle Leatherin tells me of letters, of fears, of a face at her window. These are not the ghosts of a distant past, Nan." Miss Johnson set her cup down with a clink. "Louise was fanciful," she said sharply. "She spoke of strange things, letters in her own writing, threats from years ago. I thought it nonsense, nerves from the isolation here." Her tone was dismissive, but her fingers gripped the table's edge, betraying her unease. Poirot turned to her, his head tilted. "And you, mademoiselle, saw nothing to confirm these fears? No letters, no strangers?" She shook her head, but her eyes slid away, and I wondered what she held back. Mr. Mercado, eager to fill the silence, blurted, "She did mention a man, someone from her first marriage. Said he was dead, but she seemed uncertain. Dr. Leidner's head snapped up, his face paling further. Frederick Bosner, he said, almost to himself. Her first husband. He was executed as a spy during the war. Louise told me everything before we married. It was a painful memory, nothing more. Poirot's gaze was unyielding. Executed, you say? And yet, Madame spoke of him as a threat. Curious, is it not? Father Lavigny, who had been silent, spoke in his measured, accented English. Madame Leidner confided in me once, as a man of the cloth. She spoke of guilt, of a betrayal in her youth. I urged her to find peace, but she seemed haunted. His words were gentle, but his eyes held a flicker of something caution, perhaps that made me wonder about his own past. Poirot nodded, as if filing the information away. Guilt, monsieur, is a heavy burden. It can summon ghosts where none exist. After breakfast, Poirot asked me to accompany him to Louise's room, now sealed by Captain Maitland's orders. The air inside was stale, the blood stain on the bed a grim reminder of the previous day's horror. Poirot moved with purpose, his gloved hands inspecting the small table where Louise kept her personal items. A silver mirror, a comb, a few books, nothing seemed amiss, yet he lingered over a photograph in a simple frame, Louise and Dr. Leidner, smiling against a backdrop of ruins. A happy couple, one would think, he murmured, his fingers tracing the doctor's face. But happiness, mademoiselle, can be a mask. He turned to the writing desk, its surface bare, save for a blotter and a pen. The letters, he said almost to himself. She spoke of letters in her own hand, yet none are here. Were they taken, destroyed, or never existed? I recalled Louise's fear, her insistence that the letters were real, accusing her of betrayal. Poirot's eyes gleamed. If they were real, someone wrote them to torment her. If imagined, then her mind was a battleground. Either way, the truth lies in her past. He asked me to recount every detail of Louise's final evening. I described how she had been restless, retiring early after taking a sleeping draught prescribed by Dr. Leidner. She was pale, I said, clutching that handkerchief of hers, saying she felt watched. Poirot's eyebrows rose. Watched, you say? And this sleeping draught, did you see her take it? I nodded, recalling the small glass vial Dr. Leidner had handed her, his hand steady but his eyes anxious. Poirot's mustache twitched. A husband's care, or something else? We shall see. Leaving the room, Poirot led me to the courtyard, where he stood by the low wall facing the dig site. The mounds of earth, dotted with half-unearthed walls, stretched into the distance. There, secrets buried for millennia. This place, he said, is a graveyard of the past, yet it is the living who concern us. Tell me, mademoiselle, what do you make of Dr. Leidner? I hesitated, unsure how to articulate the unease I felt. He loved her, I said, but there's something guarded about him, as if he's holding something back. Poirot nodded. Precisely. The heart guards its secrets, but the little gray cells, they uncover them. He then questioned the servants, a small group of local men who tended the house and dig site. Through an interpreter, Poirot learned that no strangers had been seen near the house, and the courtyard gate was locked each night. One man, a wiry youth named Hassan, mentioned hearing footsteps outside the house 2 nights before the murder, but he had seen nothing in the dark. Poirot thanked him, his expression thoughtful. Footsteps, but no face. A shadow perhaps, or a trick of the night. As the afternoon waned, Poirot gathered the team again, this time in the shade of the courtyard. He paced before us, his hands clasped behind his back, his voice measured but commanding. Mesdames et messieurs, let us consider the facts. Madame Leidner feared for her life. She spoke of letters, of a past that pursued her. Yet her death came in a locked room, with no sign of entry or exit. This is no work of ghosts, but of a mind clever, calculating, and close at hand. His eyes swept over us, and I felt a shiver, as if he saw through each of us to the truths we hid. Dr. Leidner stood abruptly, his voice hoarse. "You're saying one of us did this? That's impossible." Poirot raised a hand. "Not impossible, monsieur. Improbable, perhaps, but the truth cares little for probability. Someone in this house knew Madame Leidner's fears and used them. The letters, the face at the window, these were not accidents. They were a prelude to murder." The team dispersed, their faces a mix of fear and defiance. Miss Johnson lingered, her lips tight. As if wrestling with a thought she dared not voice. Mr. Mercado muttered about curses, his hands twisting a handkerchief. Not unlike Louise's. Father Lavigny returned to his tablets, his calm unshaken, while Mr. Carey strode off to the dig site, as if seeking solace in the earth. Dr. Leidner remained, staring at the photograph of Louise on the table, his fingers trembling. Poirot watched him, his expression unreadable, then turned to me. "Nurse, you are a woman of observation. Keep your eyes open. The past is a shadow, but it casts a long one." That night, as I lay in my room, the desert's silence felt oppressive, broken only by the occasional howl of a jackal. I thought of Louise's fears, of the letters she swore were real, and of Poirot's words about a calculating mind. The expedition house, once a place of discovery, now felt like a trap, its occupants bound by suspicion and secrets. I checked my doors, locked twice before sleeping, my dreams haunted by the image of a face at the window, watching, waiting, in the endless dust of Telluremia. Chapter 4. The dig unearthed the dawn at Telluremia, broke with a pale, unforgiving light, painting the ancient mounds in shades of gold and shadow. I, Amy Leatherin, woke with a heaviness in my chest, the memory of Louise Leidner's murder, clinging like the desert dust that coated everything here. The expedition house was quiet, its occupants moving with the caution of those who know they are watched not just by Hercule Poirot's sharp eyes, but by the specter of guilt that seemed to linger in every corner. The air was already warm, carrying the faint, acrid scent of baked earth and the distant bleating of goats from a nearby village. Poirot was in the courtyard when I emerged, his linen suit pristine, despite the dust, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied the ground as if it held the secrets of Babylon itself. "Mademoiselle Leatherin," he greeted, his voice bright but edged with purpose, "today we dig not for relics, but for truth. The past of Madame Leidner is buried, but not so deep as her killer believes." His mustache twitched, and I sensed the wheels of his mind turning, piecing together fragments I could not yet see. After a breakfast marked by strained silences, Dr. Leidner's hollow gaze fixed on his untouched plate, Miss Johnson's clipped responses, Mr. Mercato's fidgeting, and Father Lavigny's serene detachment, Poirot announced his intention to visit the dig site. "The work of your hands," he said to the team, "may reveal more than you know. Show me where you labor." Dr. Leidner, rousing himself, led the way, his steps heavy as if each one pained him. The others followed, their reluctance palpable, and I trailed behind, my nurse's curiosity piqued by Poirot's cryptic manner. The dig site sprawled across a low rise, a labyrinth of trenches and exposed walls where the earth had been peeled back to reveal the bones of a forgotten city. Shovels and picks lay abandoned, the workers still absent at Dr. Leidner's command. Poirot moved with surprising agility for a man of his fastidious appearance, his polished shoes navigating the uneven ground with care. He paused at a trench where a half-unearthed wall bore faint carvings, his fingers hovering over the stone. "Magnificent," he murmured. "But it is the living, not the dead, who concern us now." He turned to Mr. Mercado, whose nervous energy seemed amplified in the open air. "Monsieur, you work here daily. Tell me, did Madame Leidner visit the site often?" Mercato's eyes darted to Dr. Leidner, then back to Poirot. "Sometimes," he said, his voice high. "She liked to sketch the finds, but she stayed mostly in the house. Said the heat made her dizzy. Poirot nodded, his gaze lingering on Mercathaw's stained fingers, which clutched a trowel as if it were a lifeline. And you, monsieur, heard nothing unusual, no arguments, no visitors. Mercato shook his head, but his hesitation was telling. I heard her once, maybe a week ago, talking with Dr. Leitner near the pottery shed. She sounded upset, said something about a mistake she couldn't undo. Dr. Leitner's head snapped up, his face tightening. That was private, he said. Sharply Louise was speaking of her nerves, nothing more. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A mistake, Monsieur Mercato says. And yet you call it nerves. The truth, it seems, wears many faces. We moved to another section of the dig, where Father Lavigny was cataloguing a collection of clay tablets, their surfaces etched with wedge-shaped script. Poirot watched him closely, his head tilted. Father, you decipher the words of ancients. Did Madame Leitner ever speak of her own past to you? Lavigny's hands paused, his calm unshaken. She spoke of regrets, as many do in confession. I offered counsel, but her heart was troubled by things she would not name. His voice was steady, but I noticed his fingers tighten on the tablet, as if anchoring himself against Poirot's scrutiny. Miss Johnson, standing apart, was next. Poirot approached her with a disarming smile. Mademoiselle, you manage the records of this expedition. Precise work, yes. Did you ever notice Madame Leitner writing letters, perhaps to someone from her past? Miss Johnson's lips thinned. I saw no letters, she said curtly. Louise kept to herself, sketching or reading. If she wrote anything, she didn't share it with me. Her tone was final, but her eyes flicked to the house, and I wondered what she withheld. Mr. Carey, the architect, lingered by a reconstructed archway, his silence a wall of its own. Poirot turned to him, his voice gentle but probing. Monsieur, you map the bones of this city. Did you ever see Madame Leitner with anyone unexpected? A stranger, perhaps? Carey's jaw tightened, his sunburned face impassive. No strangers, he said. This place is too remote. Only the team and the workers. Poirot nodded, but his eyes lingered on Carey's calloused hands, which gripped a notebook with unnecessary force. We returned to the house, where Poirot asked to see Louise's personal effects again. In her room, he examined the writing desk. With renewed intensity, his gloved fingers tracing the edges of the blotter. No letters, he murmured, and yet she spoke of them with such fear. He opened the desk's single drawer, revealing a small notebook filled with Louise's sketches, delicate drawings of pottery and ruins, but nothing more. She was an artist, Poirot said, almost to himself. But what did she draw in her mind? Fear or truth? He moved to the window, its iron bars casting stark shadows across the floor. Kneeling, he inspected the screws securing the bars, his fingers probing gently. Most interesting, he said, his voice low. These screws, they are new, yet some are not as tight as others. As if they were loosened, then retightened. I frowned, recalling the undisturbed dust on the sill. But the window was barred, I said. No one could have come through. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. No one, mademoiselle. Or someone who wished us to believe so. Back in the courtyard, Poirot questioned Dr. Leitner alone, asking me to wait nearby. Through the open door, I heard fragments of their conversation. Dr. Leitner's voice, strained and halting, speaking of Louise's first marriage to Frederick Bosner. She was young, he said, barely 20 when she married him. He was a charming man, but a traitor. His execution broke her, but she rebuilt her life. I swore to protect her. Poirot's reply was soft, almost inaudible. And yet, monsieur, she died. Protection, it seems, was not enough. When they emerged, Dr. Leitner's face was ashen, his hands trembling. Poirot, unruffled, turned to me. "Nurse, tell me of the sleeping draught Madame Leidner took. Who prepared it?" I explained that Dr. Leidner had given it to her, a small vial from his own medical kit, as he often did when her nerves were frayed. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "His own kit, you say? And you saw no one else near her room that night?" I shook my head, though I recalled the faint footsteps I'd heard outside my own window, a detail I shared. Poirot's mustache twitched. Footsteps, but no face. The desert, it seems, is full of shadows. As the sun dipped low, casting long fingers of shadow across the dig site, Poirot gathered the team once more in the living quarters. His voice was calm but carried a weight that silenced even Mr. Mercathaw's nervous chatter. "Ms. Amos, the death of Madame Leidner is a puzzle, but not unsolvable. The letters she feared, the face at her window, these are threads in a tapestry. Someone wove them to frighten her, to prepare her for death. That someone is here, among us." His gaze swept the room, and I saw Miss Johnson flinch, Mr. Mercathaw's hands twist, and Dr. Leidner's eyes drop to the floor. Father Lavigny alone met Poirot's stare, his expression unreadable. That evening, as I prepared for bed, the house felt more oppressive than ever. The silence was broken only by the creak of the roof settling in the cooling night and the distant howl of a jackal. I checked my door's lock, my thoughts turning to Poirot's words about the loosened screws and the trail of dust in Louise's room. What had he seen that I had not? The image of Louise, her golden hair stained with blood, haunted me, as did the question of who among us had struck her down. I lay awake, listening to the desert's whispers, wondering if the truth, when unearthed, would be as ancient and unyielding as the ruins of Telluremia. Chapter 5. The ghostly hand. The fifth day at Telluremia dawned with a stillness that felt like the calm before a storm, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. I, Amy Letherin, rose with a knot in my stomach, the image of Louise Leidner's lifeless body, as vivid as the stark sunlight streaming through my window. The expedition house, once a place of purpose and discovery, now seemed a prison, its mud brick walls closing in on us all. Hercule Poirot's presence, like a spark in dry grass, had ignited suspicion among the team, and each glance, each word, carried the potential for betrayal. I found Poirot in the courtyard, his small frame silhouetted against the rising sun, a notebook in hand as he sketched something I couldn't see. "Mademoiselle Letherin," he said, without looking up, "you are punctual, which is good. The truth waits for no one, and today we pursue the phantom that haunted Madame Leidner." His voice was light, but his eyes, when they met mine, were sharp as flint. I mentioned the restless night, the team's unease, and he nodded. "Fear, mademoiselle, is a great revealer. It strips away the masks we wear." Breakfast was a grim affair, the clatter of plates and the murmur of conversation muted by the shadow of murder. Dr. Eric Leidner, his face gaunt, spoke little, his hands folded tightly, as if to keep them from trembling. Miss Ann Johnson, her usual sharpness dulled, kept her eyes on her tea, stirring it absently. Mr. Joseph Mercado, his nervous energy barely contained, knocked over a salt cellar, his apologies tumbling out in a rush. Father Lavigny maintained his serene composure, his fingers occasionally brushing the cross at his neck, while Mr. Carey, the architect, ate in silence, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the room. Poirot, seated at the table's head, sipped his coffee, his mustache twitching as he observed the silent currents of tension. After the meal, Poirot requested a private word with Miss Johnson in the living quarters. I lingered nearby, ostensibly tidying my medical supplies, but my ears strained to catch their exchange. Poirot's voice was gentle, almost coaxing. "Mademoiselle, you spoke of Madame Leidner's fancy's letters, a face at her window. Yet, I sense you know more than you say. What did you see, the night before her death?" Miss Johnson's reply was sharp, almost defensive. I told you, it was nothing shadows, tricks of the light. Louise was always imagining things. But her voice faltered, and Poirot pressed, his tone soft but relentless. A shadow, perhaps, but with a form. A figure, near her window. There was a pause, then Miss Johnson's voice, low and reluctant. I saw something, yes. The night before she died, I was in the courtyard, checking the storage shed. There was a figure near her window, cloaked in dark cloth. It moved quickly, vanished into the shadows. I thought it was one of the workers, sneaking about. Poirot's response was inaudible, but when they emerged, Miss Johnson's face was pale, her hands clasped tightly. Poirot's expression was unreadable, but his eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a hunter closing in on his prey. He next sought out Mr. Mercato, finding him in the pottery shed, sorting fragments with trembling hands. I followed, at Poirot's request, to take notes. Monsieur Mercato, Poirot began, his voice smooth. You mentioned Madame Leidner's argument with her husband, about a mistake. Can you recall her words? Mercato's eyes darted to the door, as if expecting an interruption. She said something about not being able to go back. She sounded angry, scared even. Dr. Leidner told her to let it go, that it was over. Poirot's head tilted. Over, you say? And yet, she died soon after. Tell me, did you see anyone near her room that night? Mercato's face flushed, his fingers fumbling with a shard. No, no one. I was at the dig until late, then in my room. Poirot's smile was thin. And your hands, miss, hear those stains? From pottery, or something else? Mercato glanced at his fingers, where faint chemical marks lingered. Just cleaning solutions, for the artifacts. Nothing else? Poirot nodded, but his eyes lingered on Mercato's hands, as if they held a secret of their own. We moved to Father Lavigny's workspace. A small room cluttered with tablets and papers, the air thick with the scent of old parchment. Poirot examined a cuneiform tablet, his fingers tracing the wedges with care. Father, you spoke of Madame Leidner's guilt. Did she ever mention a name, Frederick Bosner, perhaps? Lavigny's calm faltered for a moment, his eyes narrowing. She did not name him, but she spoke of a man from her youth, someone she wronged. I urged her to seek forgiveness, but she said it was too late. Poirot's mustache twitched. Too late, yet the past reached out to her. Tell me, did you ever see these letters she feared? Lavigny shook his head. She showed me nothing. I thought them a product of her nerves. Poirot's gaze was piercing. And you, father, were in your room the night before her death. You heard nothing, saw nothing. Lavigny met his eyes, his voice steady. I was here, working. The house was quiet. Poirot thanked him, but as we left, he murmured to me, a man of God, perhaps, but his calm is too perfect, Nan. Back in Louise's room, Poirot's attention turned to the writing desk once more. He examined the blotter, lifting it to reveal a faint impression of writing, as if a letter had been pressed hard against it. Mademoiselle, he said, holding it to the light, this desk has secrets. No letters, yet the ghost of one remains. He produced a pencil and lightly shaded the blotter, revealing fragments of words, betrayed in Frederick. My heart quickened. She wrote something, I said, or someone did. Poirot nodded. Someone, indeed. The hand that wrote this may be the hand that killed her. He moved to the window, his fingers probing the bars again. The figure Miss Johnson saw, he said, it was no ghost. Someone stood here, perhaps to frighten, perhaps to plan. But how did they enter a locked room? He knelt, examining the floor's dust trail, which led from the bed to the window. This dust, he said, it is not from the sill. It is heavier, like sand from the dig. Someone brought it here, perhaps on their shoes, or something they carried. I frowned, puzzled. But the door was locked, the key inside. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. The key, mademoiselle, is not always the answer. That afternoon, Poirot questioned Mr. Carey, who was sketching a new trench layout at the dig site. His answers were curt, his eyes avoiding Poirot's. I saw nothing, he said. I was working, as always. Poirot pressed, his voice gentle but insistent. And yet, monsieur, you were close to Madame La. Did she ever speak of her fears to you? Carey's pencil paused, his jaw tightening. She mentioned the letters once, said they were like her own writing. I told her to ignore them, that it was just nerves. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Ignore them, you say? And yet she died. A coincidence, perhaps. As evening fell, the team gathered for dinner, the atmosphere thick with unease. Dr. Leidner, his grief now tinged with agitation, spoke of resuming the dig to honor Louise's love for their work. Miss Johnson objected sharply, saying it was too soon, while Mercathaw's nervous laughter filled the silence. Father Lavigny offered a quiet prayer, but his eyes lingered on Poirot, who ate sparingly, his gaze moving from face to face. After dinner, he drew me aside. Nurse, the figure at the window, the letters, the dust, these are pieces of a mosaic. Someone in this house wove a web to trap Madame Leidner. Tomorrow, we tighten the threads. That night, I lay awake, the desert's silence broken by faint sounds, a creak in the hall, a whisper of wind against the bars. Louise's fears, once dismissed as fancies, now felt all too real. The ghostly hand that wrote her letters, the shadow at her window, were they the work of a living soul among us? Poirot's words echoed in my mind. The truth was close, hidden in the shadows of the past. As I checked my door's lock, I wondered who among us carried the weight of that truth, and whether the desert's relentless light would expose it before another life was lost. Chapter 6. The puzzle of the Keitha sixth day, at Tel Euremia, broke with a heat that seemed to press down on the expedition house like a physical weight, the air thick with dust and suspicion. I, Amy Leatherin, woke with a sense of foreboding. The memory of Louise Leidner's murder and Hercule Poirot's relentless probing weaving through my restless dreams. The house was quiet, its occupants moving with the wariness of those who know a trap is being set, though by whom and for what, none could say. The desert stretched endlessly beyond the mud-brick walls, its silence a stark contrast to the turmoil within. Poirot was already at work when I emerged, standing in the courtyard with a small magnifying glass, examining the ground near Louise's window. His linen suit was immaculate, his mustache perfectly waxed, yet his eyes burned with an intensity that made the morning feel sharper. Mademoiselle Leatherin, he greeted, pocketing the glass. The key to a mystery is often in the smallest detail. Today, we unlock the puzzle of the locked room. His voice held a quiet excitement, as if he were closing in on a truth that had eluded us all. Breakfast was a tense ritual. The team gathered around the table with the air of unwilling conspirators. Dr. Eric Leidner's face was haggard, his hands unsteady as he poured tea, his grief now laced with a nervous edge. Miss Ann Johnson's sharp eyes darted between her colleagues, her usual briskness replaced by a guarded silence. Mr. Joseph Mercado, his fingers stained with chemical marks, fidgeted incessantly, knocking over a spoon with a clatter that made everyone start. Mr. Carey, the architect, sat apart, his silence as impenetrable as the ancient walls he mapped. Father Lavigny, serene as ever, murmured a blessing, but his calm seemed to me a mask, hiding thoughts I could not guess. Poirot, at the table's head, sipped his coffee, his gaze moving from face to face, like a painter studying a canvas. After the meal, Poirot requested a closer examination of Louise's room, asking me to join him. The chamber, still sealed by Captain Maitland's orders, felt like a tomb, the air heavy with the lingering scent of blood and dust. Poirot moved to the door, its lock now broken from our forced entry, and studied the mechanism with care. The key, found in Louise's pocket after her death, lay on the table, its brass surface gleaming faintly. Poirot picked it up, turning it over in his gloved hands. "This key," he said, "is the heart of the puzzle. The door was locked, the window barred, yet Madame Leidner was killed. How?" He knelt by the lock, his magnifying glass catching a faint scratch on the metal, barely visible to the naked eye. "Most curious," he murmured. "This market is not from the key. Something else was used here, perhaps a tool, to open the lock after the crime." I frowned, puzzled. But the key was inside, in her pocket. No one could have locked it from outside. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Precisely, mademoiselle. The lock was opened and locked again, but not in the way we assume." He moved to the window, its iron bars casting stark shadows across the floor. The smudge on the sill, which he had noted before, drew his attention again. "This dust," he said, running a finger along the edge. "It is undisturbed, save for this mark. Yet the bars, they are secure except for these screws." He pointed. Two screws, their heads slightly worn, as if turned recently. Someone tampered with them, perhaps to create an illusion of impossibility. I shook my head, struggling to follow, but the bars weren't removed. The window was shut tight. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "An illusion, mademoiselle, is often more powerful than reality." He turned his attention to the trail of dust on the floor, leading from the bed to the window. "This sand," he said, kneeling to inspect it, "is from the dig site, not the courtyard. It suggests someone entered or left, carrying the earth of their work." He rose, his gaze sweeping the room. "The statuette, the lock, the dust, these are pieces of a machine designed to mislead. But Hercule Poirot is not so easily deceived." Leaving the room, Poirot sought out the servants again, through the interpreter, Hassan, the young man. Nervous under Poirot's scrutiny, confirmed that the courtyard gate was locked each night, and no one had been seen entering or leaving. "But, Effendi," Hassan added, his voice hesitant, "the night before the lady died, I saw a light in the house, moving, like a lamp carried in the dark." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "A light, you say, where?" Hassan pointed toward the wing where Louise's room lay. "There, near her window, but it was gone quickly." Poirot thanked him, his expression thoughtful. "A light in the dark," he murmured to me, "perhaps to guide a killer, or to create a ghost." Next, Poirot questioned Dr. Leidner, in the privacy of the living quarters, asking me to remain nearby. Their voices carried through the thin walls, Dr. Leidner's low and strained. "I gave her the sleeping draught myself," he said. "It was a mild sedative, nothing harmful. She often needed it to calm her nerves." Poirot's reply was measured. "And you prepared it, monsieur, from your own kit?" Dr. Leidner's voice faltered. "Yes, I kept it for her. She trusted me." Poirot's tone sharpened. "Trusted you, yet she died. The draught, it was strong that night, was it not?" Dr. Leidner's response was a choked silence. And when they emerged, his face was gray, his hands trembling. Poirot then turned to Mr. Carey, finding him in the courtyard, sketching a new trench layout. "Monsieur Poirot began, his voice gentle but probing. You are a man of precision, yet you saw nothing the night before Madame Leidner's death. No light, no figure." Carey's pencil paused, his jaw tightening. "I was in my room," he said curtly. "I saw nothing, heard nothing." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, you were close to her. Did she ever speak of her fears to you, beyond the letters?" Carey's gaze flickered, then hardened. "She was nervous, that's all. This place gets to people." Poirot nodded, but his expression suggested he saw more than Carey admitted. As the afternoon waned, Poirot gathered the team in the living quarters, his presence commanding despite his small stature. "Mies, Amos," he said, his voice clear and deliberate. "The locked room is no mystery to Hercule Poirot. The key, the bars, the dust, they tell a story of deception. Someone entered that room, struck Madame Leidner, and left, locking the door behind them. The how is clear. The who, we shall soon know." His gaze swept the room, and I saw Miss Johnson's hands clench, Mr. Mercatho's eyes dart to the door, and Dr. Leidner's face crumple. Father Lavigny alone remained calm, his fingers tracing his cross. That evening, as the team dispersed, Poirot drew me aside. "Nurse, the sleeping draught is a key of its own. It ensured Madame Leidner was helpless, unable to cry out. The killer knew her habits, her trust in her husband." I shivered, recalling Dr. Leidner's trembling hands as he handed her the vial. "You think he—" I began, but Poirot raised a hand. "I think nothing, mademoiselle. I observe, I deduce. The truth is near, hidden in the shadows of this house." As I retired to my room, the desert night closed in, its silence broken only by the faint creak of the house settling. I checked my door's lock, my thoughts swirling with Poirot's discoveries: the scratched lock, the loosened screws, the trail of dust. The image of Louise, her fear of a ghostly hand, haunted me. Had she known her killer's face, or was it cloaked in the darkness she feared? I lay awake, listening to the desert's whispers, wondering what final piece of the puzzle Poirot would unearth, and whether it would shatter the fragile peace of Telluremia. Chapter 7. The masquerade. The seventh day at Telluremia dawned with a heat so fierce it seemed to sear the very thoughts from one's mind. Yet the chill of suspicion within the expedition house was colder still. I, Amy Leatherin, woke with a heaviness that no amount of rest could lift, the weight of Louise Leidner's murder pressing upon me like the relentless sun. The mud-brick walls, once a backdrop to scholarly ambition, now felt like a fortress guarding secrets too dangerous to unearth. Hercule Poirot's presence, with his piercing eyes and unyielding questions, had turned every glance and gesture into a potential confession, and the team moved through the morning with the caution of those walking a tightrope over a chasm. I found Poirot in the living quarters, standing before the long table where maps and artifacts lay scattered, his small hands adjusting his tie with meticulous care. "Mademoiselle Leatherin," he said, his voice bright but edged with purpose, "today we peel back the masks. The killer of Madame Leidner hides behind a face we know, but it is not the face they show." His mustache twitched, and I felt a shiver, as if the desert itself held its breath for what he might uncover. Breakfast was a study in tension, the clink of cutlery and the murmur of forced pleasantries barely masking the unease. Dr. Eric Leidner, his scholarly demeanor eroded by grief and strain, sat with his hands clasped tightly, his eyes avoiding the empty chair where Louise once sat. Miss Ann Johnson, her sharp tongue muted, stirred her tea with a precision that belied her trembling fingers. Mr. Joseph Mercado, his nervous energy now a palpable agitation, knocked over his cup, his apologies stumbling over each other. Mr. Carey, the architect, remained silent, his sunburned face a mask of stoicism, while Father Lavigny, his black robes a stark contrast to the dusty room, offered a quiet prayer, his calm unshaken but somehow unsettling. Poirot, at the table's head, ate sparingly, his gaze moving from face to face as if reading a script only he could see. After the meal, Poirot announced his intention to question each member of the team individually, beginning with Father Lavigny. He led the monk to a small anteroom, asking me to accompany them to take notes. The room, cluttered with books and tablets, smelled of old parchment and wax. Poirot sat opposite Lavigny, his eyes fixed on the monk's serene face. "Father," he began, his voice smooth but probing, "you are a man of learning, yet you came to this remote place. Tell me, what brings a scholar of your caliber to Telluremia?" Lavigny's fingers brushed his cross, his voice steady. The tablets, Monsieur Poirot. Their secrets are a calling, as much as my faith. Poirot's head tilted. And yet, you knew Madame Leidner's fears. Did she ever show you the letters she spoke of? Lavigny's calm faltered, his eyes flickering. She mentioned them, yes, but showed me nothing. I thought them a product of her imagination, a burden of guilt. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but relentless. Guilt, you say? And what of your own past, father, before? The cloth, where were you? Lavigny's hand stilled, his expression tightening. In France, studying antiquities. My life before the monastery is irrelevant. Poirot's smile was thin. Nothing is irrelevant, monsieur. The past is a shadow that follows us all. Next. Poirot sought out Mr. Mercado in the pottery shed, where the air was thick with the scent of chemicals and clay. Mercado's hands, still stained, trembled as he sorted shards, his eyes darting to Poirot. Monsieur Poirot said, your hands betray you. These stains, are they truly from cleaning artifacts, or something else? A photograph, perhaps, developed in secret. Mercado's face flushed, his voice rising. Photographs. No, no, just the solutions we use here. I swear it. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And the night before Madame Leidner's death, where were you? Not at the dig, I think. Mercado stammered. In my room, I told you, I saw nothing. Poirot nodded, but his gaze lingered on Mercado's hands, as if they held a truth he refused to speak. We moved to Miss Johnson, who stood in the courtyard, her arms crossed tightly. Poirot's approach was gentle, almost coaxing. Mademoiselle, you saw a figure at Madame Leidner's window. Why did you not speak of it sooner? Her lips thinned, her voice sharp. I wasn't sure what I saw. It was dark, just a shadow. I didn't want to stir trouble. Poirot's mustache twitched. Trouble, mademoiselle, is already here. Did this shadow have a face, a form you recognized? She shook her head, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear, and I wondered what she kept locked within. Mr. Carey was next, found at the dig site, measuring a trench with a surveyor's precision. Poirot's questions were direct. Monsieur, you are a man of few words, yet you were close to Madame Leidner. Did she ever hint at a threat, beyond her fears? Carey's jaw tightened, his pencil pausing over his notebook. She was nervous, that's all. This place, the isolation, it got to her. Poirot's gaze was unyielding. And you, monsieur, felt nothing. No unasi, no suspicion. Carey's eyes met his, hard and unyielding. I do my work. I don't pry into others' lives. Poirot nodded, but his expression suggested he saw through Carey's stoic facade. Finally, Poirot called Dr. Leidner to the living quarters, the rest of the team dismissed to their tasks. I stood nearby, my notebook ready, as Poirot faced the grieving husband. Monsieur, he began, you loved your wife, yet she died under your care. Tell me of her past. Frederick Bosner, the man she married before you. Dr. Leidner's hands trembled, his voice low. He was a traitor, executed during the war. Louise was young, naive. She told me everything before we married. It was over, buried. Poirot's voice sharpened. Buried, you say? Yet she feared his return. Why? Dr. Leidner's eyes dropped, his voice barely audible. She thought he might still be alive. A delusion, nothing more. Poirot leaned forward. A delusion that killed her, perhaps. As Dr. Leidner left, his shoulders slumped. Poirot turned to me, his eyes gleaming. Nurse, the masks are slipping. Each of them hides something, a fear, a guilt, a secret. The letters, the figure, the sleeping drafts, they are parts of a masquerade, designed to conceal the truth. He produced a small envelope from his pocket, its edges worn. This, he said, was found in Madame Leidner's belongings, tucked beneath her mattress. Not in her hand, but signed Frederick. I gasped, reading the single line. You cannot escape what you did. It's real, I whispered. Poirot nodded. Real, and a key to the killer's mind. That evening, as the team gathered for dinner, the air was thick with unspoken accusations. Dr. Leidner barely touched his food, his eyes fixed on the photograph of Louise on the table. Miss Johnson's hands shook as she served her usual efficiency. Faltering, Maricotha's nervous chatter filled the silence, while Kara's stoic silence seemed to weigh heavier than ever. Father Lavigny offered a prayer, but his calm felt like a shield, deflecting Poirot's gaze. After the meal, Poirot rose, his voice commanding. Ms. Amos, the truth is near. Tomorrow, we unmask the killer. Sleep well, if you can. As I retired to my room, the desert night closed in, its silence broken by the faint creak of the house and the distant cry of a jackal. I checked my door's lock, my thoughts swirling with Poirot's discoveries: the scratched lock, the worn screws, the letter signed by a dead man. Louise's fears, once dismissed as fancies, now seemed a warning we had all ignored. The masquerade, as Poirot called it, was nearing its end, but who among us wore the killer's mask? I lay awake, the weight of that question heavier than the desert's heat, wondering what final revelation awaited in the dust of Tellurime Shah. Chapter 8. The trap is set. The 8th day, at Tellurimia, broke with a sky so clear it seemed to mock the turmoil within the expedition house, where suspicion hung thicker than the desert dust. I, Amy Leatherin, woke with a racing heart, the weight of Louise Leidner's murder and Hercule Poirot's relentless pursuit of the truth pressing upon me like the oppressive heat. The mud brick walls, once a shelter for scholarly dreams, now felt like a labyrinth, each corridor leading to secrets I feared to uncover. The team moved through the morning with the wariness of prey, their eyes darting to Poirot, whose presence was a constant reminder that one among us was a killer. I found Poirot in the courtyard, his small figure bent over a patch of earth near Louise's window, his gloved hands carefully tying a thin thread to a pebble, which he placed just inside the shadow of the wall. Mademoiselle Leatherin, he said, straightening, his voice bright but laced with intent. Today, we set a trap. The killer is clever, but even the cleverest fox leaves a trace. His mustache twitched, and his eyes gleamed with the anticipation of a hunter closing in. I asked what the thread was for, and he smiled enigmatically. A test, mademoiselle, to see who moves in the dark. Breakfast was a strained ritual, the clatter of plates and the murmur of forced conversation barely masking the tension. Dr. Eric Leidner, his face etched with exhaustion, pushed his food around his plate, his grief now tinged with a nervous agitation that set my nerves on edge. Miss Ann Johnson, her sharp features drawn, avoided eye contact, her hands gripping her teacup as if it anchored her. Mr. Joseph Mercado, his nervous energy bordering on panic, spilled sugar across the table, his apologies tumbling out in a rush. Mr. Carey, the architect, sat in his usual silence, his sunburned face unreadable, while Father Lavigny, his black robes stark against the dusty room, offered a prayer that felt more like a ritual than a comfort. Poirot, at the table's head, sipped his coffee, his gaze sweeping over us like a searchlight. After the meal, Poirot announced his plan to the team, his voice calm but commanding. Miss Amos, tomorrow evening I shall reveal the killer of Madame Leidner. Tonight, I ask you to remain in your rooms after dinner. The truth is close, and I would not have it disturbed. His words sent a ripple of unease through the room. Dr. Leidner's hands trembled, Miss Johnson's lips tightened, and Markatha's eyes darted to the door. Kara's silence grew heavier, and even Father Lavigny's calm seemed to flicker, his fingers pausing on his cross. Poirot dismissed them, but his eyes lingered on each, as if memorizing their reactions. He then led me to the dig site, where the trenches lay silent under the midday sun. The air was thick with the scent of baked Earth and the ancient walls seemed to watch us, their carvings worn but enduring. Poirot paced a trench, his polished shoes absurdly out of place, his gaze fixed on the ground. "Mademoiselle," he said, "the dust here is the same as in Madame Leitner's room course, from the deeper layers. Someone brought it inside. Perhaps on their shoes, perhaps deliberately." I recalled the trail of dust from the bed to the window, and a chill ran through me. "You think the killer came from the dig?" I asked. Poirot's smile was cryptic. "I think, mademoiselle, that the killer walked among us, leaving traces we did not see." He questioned Mr. Carey, who was measuring a new section of the site. "Monsieur Poirot said, his voice gentle but probing, you are always here, mapping the past. Did you ever see Madame Leitner with someone unexpected? A worker, perhaps, lingering near the house?" Kara's jaw tightened, his pencil pausing over his notebook. "No one," he said curtly. "The workers stay at the dig." Louise kept to herself. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, a light was seen near her window, a figure in the dark." "You saw nothing?" Kara's gaze hardened. "Nothing," he repeated, but his knuckles whitened around his pencil. Next, Poirot sought out Miss Johnson in the storage shed, where she was cataloging pottery shards. Her hands moved mechanically, but her eyes were wary. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began, "you saw a figure at Madame Leitner's window. Have you remembered anything more? A detail, perhaps, of its shape or movement?" Miss Johnson's lips thinned. "It was just a shadow, as I told you. I couldn't see clearly." Poirot leaned closer, his voice soft but insistent. "And yet, you hesitated to speak of it. Why, mademoiselle? What do you fear?" Her hands stilled, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what I saw. I don't want to accuse anyone wrongly." Poirot nodded, but his gaze lingered, as if seeing through her words. We returned to the house, where Poirot examined Louise's room once more. He stood by the window, his fingers tracing the thread he had tied to the pebble. "If someone passes here tonight," he said, "the thread will break, and we will know." I frowned, puzzled. But who would come here now? "The room's been searched." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The killer, mademoiselle, is not as secure as they believe. They may return to ensure their secret is safe." He moved to the writing desk, lifting the blotter again to study the faint impressions of words. "Betrayed in Frederick." "This letter," he said, "was written to terrify her, to prepare her for death. But by whom? That is the question." As evening approached, Poirot questioned Dr. Leitner in the living quarters, asking me to remain nearby. Their voices carried through the thin walls, Dr. Leitner's low and strained. "I loved her," he said, his voice breaking. "I would never have hurt her." Poirot's reply was measured. "And yet, monsieur, you gave her the sleeping draught. You knew her fears, her past. Did you know of Frederick Bosner's shadow in her life?" Dr. Leitner's response was a choked whisper. "She thought he was alive, but it was impossible. He was executed. I told her it was her imagination." Poirot's voice sharpened. "Imagination, or a truth you could not face?" Dinner was a grim affair, the team's silence broken only by Mercathaw's nervous chatter about the dig's progress, which no one acknowledged. Dr. Leitner's eyes were fixed on the photograph of Louise, his hands trembling. Miss Johnson's gaze darted to Poirot, her usual sharpness replaced by unease. Carey ate mechanically, his silence a wall, while Father Lavigny's calm seemed almost defiant, his prayer a soft murmur in the tense air. Poirot, eating sparingly, announced his plan to retire early, urging us all to do the same. "The night," he said, "may bring answers. Stay in your rooms, and lock your doors." As the team dispersed, I lingered, watching Poirot slip into the courtyard, his small figure moving silently toward Louise's window. I retired to my room, my heart pounding, and checked my lock twice. The desert night was silent, save for the faint creak of the house and the distant howl of a jackal. I lay awake, my thoughts swirling with Poirot's trap, the thread, the pebble, the letter signed by a dead man. Suddenly, a cry pierced the darkness, sharp and panicked. From the direction of the courtyard, I rushed out, my robe hastily thrown on, and found Mr. Mercado stumbling through the gate, clutching his arm, blood seeping through his fingers. "Someone attacked me," he gasped, his eyes wild. In the dark, near the window, Poirot appeared, his flashlight cutting through the night, his face calm but alert. He examined Mercadot's arm, a shallow cut, more startling than serious. "A knife, you say?" Poirot asked, his voice steady. Mercado nodded, his breath ragged. "I went to check the shed, and someone came at me." Poirot's eyes gleamed as he glanced at the window, where the thread lay broken on the ground. "The trap," he said softly, "has caught its prey." He sent Mercado to me for bandaging, then turned to the team, who had gathered, drawn by the cry. "Mes Amos," he said, his voice cutting through the night. "Someone moved in the dark, and now we know they fear discovery. Tomorrow, the truth will be revealed." As I tended to Mercadot's wound, his nervous muttering filling the silence, I saw Poirot return to the window, his flashlight sweeping the ground. The desert night closed in, its secrets stirred by Poirot's trap, and I wondered who among us had stepped into it, and what final revelation awaited in the dust of Tel Urimia. Chapter 9. The unveiling. The 9th day at Tel Urimia dawned with a heat that seemed to tighten the noose of suspicion around the expedition house, the air thick with the promise of revelation. I, Amy Leatherin, woke with a pounding heart. The events of the previous night, Mr. Mercadot's cry, the broken thread, Hercule Poirot's cryptic assurance that the trap had caught its prey swirling in my mind like the dust storms that sometimes swept the desert. The mud-brick walls, once a refuge for scholarly pursuit, now felt like a stage where the final act of a tragedy was about to unfold. The team moved through the morning with the wariness of those awaiting judgment, their eyes darting to Poirot, whose calm presence was a storm's eye in the gathering tension. I found Poirot in the courtyard, his small figure immaculate in a fresh linen suit, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied the spot where the thread had been broken. "Mademoiselle Leatherin," he greeted, his voice bright but edged with purpose, "the fox has stirred, and now we corner it. Tonight, we unveil the truth." His mustache twitched, and his eyes gleamed with the certainty of a man who had solved a puzzle others could not even see. I asked about Mercadot's attack, and he waved a hand. "A distraction, perhaps, or a misstep. But it has shown us the killer's fear." Breakfast was a silent ordeal, the clatter of cutlery replaced by a heavy stillness. Dr. Eric Leitner, his face a mask of exhaustion and dread, sat with his hands folded, his eyes fixed on the photograph of Louise that still stood on the table. Miss Ann Johnson, her sharp features pinched, stirred her tea mechanically, her gaze avoiding Poirot's. Mr. Joseph Mercado, his arm bandaged from the previous night's wound, fidgeted nervously, his usual chatter subdued. Mr. Carey, the architect, maintained his stoic silence, his sunburned face unreadable, while Father Lavigny, his black robes stark against the dusty room, offered a prayer that seemed to hang in the air like a warning. Poirot, at the table's head, sipped his coffee, his eyes moving from face to face, as if reading their souls. After the meal, Poirot gathered the team in the living quarters, the lamplight casting long shadows across the room. "Miss Amos," he began, his voice clear and commanding, "the murder of Madame Leitner is no work of ghosts or curses. It is a crime of calculation, woven with care to deceive. Tonight, I reveal the killer." His words sent a shiver through the room, and I saw Dr. Leitner's hands tremble, Miss Johnson's lips tighten, and Mercadot's eyes dart to the door. Kara's silence grew heavier, and even Father Lavigny's calm seemed to waver, his fingers pausing on his cross. Poirot paced before us, his small figure commanding the room like a general. Let us begin with the facts. Madame Leidner was found dead in her locked room, her skull crushed by a clay statuette. The door was locked, the key in her pocket. The window was barred, the dust on the sill undisturbed save for a smudge. Yet, a trail of sand, from the dig site, led from the bed to the window. How, you ask, did the killer enter and leave? The answer is simple. They did not need to. He turned to the window, gesturing to the bars. These bars were loosened, then retightened, to suggest an impossible crime. The screws, worn and loose, tell the story. The killer entered through the window before the murder, loosening the bars to create a path, then struck Madame Leidner. As she slept, her mind clouded by a sleeping draft, they left through the window, retightening the bars, and locked the door from inside using a tula wire. Perhaps to turn the key from the outside, creating the illusion of a sealed room. I gasped, the pieces falling into place. But the dust trail, I said. It led to the window. Poirot nodded. Oui, mademoiselle. The killer dragged a heavy crate from the dig site, scattering sand to mislead us. They wished us to believe an outsider entered, but the sand was their own, carried on their shoes or the crate itself. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. And the letters, signed Frederick, accusing Madame Leidner of betrayal. Forgeries, written to terrify her, to weaken her resolve. They were not in her hand, but crafted to seem so, a cruel prelude to her death. He turned to Dr. Leidner, whose face was ashen. Monsieur, you loved your wife, yet you gave her the sleeping draught a stronger dose than usual, perhaps. Dr. Leidner's voice was hoarse. It was her usual dose. I would never harm her. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. And yet you knew her past, her fears of Frederick Bosner, her first husband, executed as a spy. You told her it was a delusion, but was it? He produced the letter from his pocket, its single line stark. You cannot escape what you did. This was found beneath her mattress. Not her writing, but a man's. Yours, Monsieur Leidner, or, should I say, Frederick Bosner. A collective gasp filled the room. Dr. Leidner staggered, his hands gripping the table. That's absurd, he cried. I am Eric Leidner. Bosner is dead. Poirot's voice was calm but cutting. Nan, monsieur, you are Bosner, who faked his death to escape justice during the war. You reinvented yourself as Leidner, a scholar, and won Louise's love again. But when she recognized you, when she began to suspect the truth, you could not risk exposure. You forged the letters to torment her, to make her doubt her sanity. You gave her a stronger draft, ensuring she would not wake, and struck her with the statuette, staging the locked room to deflect suspicion. Miss Johnson's voice broke the silence, sharp and trembling. But the figure I saw at the window, someone was there. Poirot nodded. Oui, mademoiselle. A distraction perhaps, or Bosner himself, ensuring his plan was set. The thread I placed was broken last night, by someone checking the window, someone who feared their work was undone. He turned to Mercado, whose face was pale. And you, monsieur, with your stained hands, photographic chemicals, not cleaning solutions. You developed images for Bosner, perhaps of the forged letters, to aid his deception. Your wound last night was no attack, but a clumsy attempt to divert suspicion, was it not? Mercado's eyes widened, his voice a stammer. I only helped with photographs. I didn't know. Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly. You knew enough, monsieur, to fear discovery. He turned to the others. Miss Johnson saw a shadow, but her silence protected the killer. Mr. Carey, your silence hid your suspicions. Father Livigny, your calm concealed a past of your own, though not murder. Livigny's eyes flickered, but he said nothing. Poirot faced Dr. Leidner again. Monsieur, your love for Louise was real, but your fear was greater. You killed her to preserve your new life, your new name. Dr. Leidner's face crumpled, his voice a whisper. I couldn't lose her again. She was going to tell everyone. I had no choice. The confession hung in the air, a stark admission. That silenced the room. Poirot stepped back, his voice gentle now. The truth, it is a heavy burden, but it is free now. Captain Maitland, who had been summoned, stepped forward, his face grim as he took Dr. Leidner's arm. The team sat in stunned silence, their masks fallen, their secrets laid bare. As Dr. Leidner was led away, Poirot turned to me. Nurse, the human heart is a labyrinth, but the little gray cells, they find the way. That night, the expedition house felt emptier, its purpose shattered. Poirot stood in the courtyard, gazing at the stars. The desert, he said, keeps its secrets, but not from Hercule Poirot. I retired to my room, the weight of the truth settling over me. The image of Louise's fear finally answered, but at a cost that left the dust of Telluremia heavier than ever. Chapter 10. The Confession, the 10th day, at Telluremia, broke with a dawn that seemed to carry the weight of the previous night's revelations. The air heavy with the aftermath of truth laid bare. I, Amy Leatherin, woke with a mind still reeling. From Hercule Poirot's unveiling of Dr. Eric Leidner as Frederick Bosner, the man who had faked his death and murdered his wife Louise to protect his secret. The expedition house, once a hub of scholarly ambition, now felt like a husk, its occupants moving through the morning with the stunned silence of those who had witnessed a mask torn away. The desert stretched endlessly beyond the mud-brick walls, its vastness a stark contrast to the claustrophobic tension within. I found Poirot in the living quarters, seated at the long table, his small hands folded neatly before him, his eyes fixed on the photograph of Louise and Dr. Leidner that still stood, a relic of a love now tainted by betrayal. Mademoiselle Leatherin, he greeted, his voice calm but tinged with a quiet melancholy. The truth is uncovered, but the heart still mourns. Today we hear the confession, and we close the wounds. His mustache twitched, and I sensed a weariness beneath his usual vigor, as if the act of unmasking a killer had taken its toll. Breakfast was a hollow ritual, the team gathered with faces drawn and eyes averted. Dr. Leidner or Frederick Bosner, as I now struggled to think of him, was absent, confined to his room under Captain Maitland's watch, awaiting transfer to Baghdad. Miss Ann Johnson, her sharp features softened by exhaustion, stirred her tea listlessly, her gaze flickering to the empty chair where Leidner once sat. Mr. Joseph Mikado, his bandaged arm a reminder of his clumsy deception, sat hunched, his nervous energy drained. Mr. Carey, the architect, maintained his stoic silence, his sunburned hands folded tightly, while Father Lavigny, his black robes stark against the dusty room, offered a prayer that felt more like a lament. Poirot at the table's head sipped his coffee, his eyes observing the team with a gentleness that belied his earlier intensity. After the meal, Poirot requested a final meeting with Dr. Leidner, in the presence of Captain Maitland and myself, to serve as a witness. We gathered in the small anteroom, its walls lined with books and tablets, the air thick with the scent of old parchment and the weight of impending confession. Dr. Leidner sat slumped in a chair, his scholarly poise shattered, his face a map of grief and guilt. Captain Maitland stood by the door, his khaki uniform crisp, his notebook ready. Poirot faced Leidner, his voice soft but commanding. "Monsieur, you have confessed to the murder of your wife. Now, tell us the why, the heart of your crime." Leidner's hands trembled, his voice barely above a whisper. "I loved her," he began, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Louise was my world, even when I was Frederick Bosner. During the war, I was young, reckless, caught up in espionage, not for betrayal, but for survival. When I was sentenced, I escaped, faked my death, and became Eric Leidner. I built a new life, a new name. Then I found her again, years later, And she didn't know me at first. I courted her, won her love, but I never told her who I was." He paused, his breath ragged. Poirot's eyes never left him. "And when did—" "She suspects, monsieur." Leidner's voice broke. "A month ago, here at Telluremia. She saw an old photograph in my papers, one from my youth. Her face changed. She knew. She didn't say it outright, but she started asking questions, piecing it together. She was going to tell the others, to expose me. I couldn't let that happen. My life, my work, it would all be destroyed." Poirot leaned forward, his voice steady. "So you planned her death? The letters, the figure at the window, these were your tools?" "Oui." Leidner nodded, his eyes glistening. "I wrote the letters, copied her handwriting from her sketches. I wanted her to think she was losing her mind, to make her doubt herself. I stood outside her window some nights, wearing a cloak, letting her see a shadow. It was cruel, but I thought it would keep her quiet." His voice faltered. "I didn't want to kill her, but she was going to tell. I had no choice." I felt a chill, despite the heat, at the cold calculation in his words. Poirot's expression remained impassive. "And the sleeping draught, monsieur? You ensured she would not wake?" Leidner's hands clenched. "I doubled the dose that night, mixed it myself. She trusted me, took it without question. I waited until she was asleep. Then, I used the statuette. It was quick, painless. I locked the door with a wire through the keyhole, loosened the window bars to make it seem someone could have entered, then tightened them again. I dragged a crate from the dig to scatter sand, to mislead you." Poirot nodded, his eyes narrowing. "And the key, monsieur? You placed it in her pocket to complete the illusion of a locked room." Leidner's head bowed. "Yes, I thought it would look impossible, that no one would suspect me. I loved her, but I couldn't lose everything I'd built." His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands. His confession, a raw wound laid bare. Captain Maitland scribbled furiously, his face grim. Poirot turned to me, his voice low. "Nurse, the human heart is a paradox capable of love and cruelty in equal measure. Monsieur Bosner loved his wife, yet killed her to preserve a lie." He addressed Leidner again. "Your confession is complete, monsieur. The law will judge you now." Leidner said nothing, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs as Maitland led him away, his steps heavy with the weight of his guilt. Afterward, Poirot gathered the team in the living quarters, the lamplight casting their faces in stark relief. "Mes amis," he said, his voice clear, "the crime is solved, the killer unmasked. But there are threads to tie." He turned to Mercado, whose face was pale. "Monsieur, your photographs aided Bosner's deception, though you did not know their purpose. Your silence was bought with his knowledge of your thefts from the dig." Mercado's head dropped, his voice a whisper. "I took a few artifacts, sold them. He found out, threatened to expose me. I had to help him." Poirot faced Miss Johnson. "Mademoiselle, your silence about the figure at the window protected Bosner, though you suspected him. Why?" Her lips trembled. I cared for him, in my way. I didn't want to believe it." Poirot's gaze softened. "Love blinds us, but the truth sees clearly." "To Carrie," he said, "Monsieur, your silence hid your own suspicions, but you chose loyalty over truth." Carrie's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Father Lavigny, Poirot noted, was no monk but a scholar hiding from academic disgrace, though uninvolved in the murder. Lavigny's eyes flickered, but he remained silent. As the team dispersed, their faces heavy with shame and relief, Poirot turned to me. "Nurse, the confession is the end, but not the healing. The heart must find its own way." That evening, the house felt quieter, the weight of secrets lifted but replaced by a hollow grief. I sat in my room, the desert's silence broken only by the faint creak of the roof. The image of Leidner's broken confession lingered, a reminder of love twisted into betrayal. As I checked my lock, I wondered what scars would remain when the dust of Telluremia settled, and whether Poirot's truth had freed us or merely exposed the fragility of our bonds. Chapter 11. The Loose Threads, the 11th Day, at Tell Urimshe dawned with a stillness that felt like the aftermath of a storm. The desert air heavy with the weight of truths unearthed and lives unraveled. I, Amy Leatherin, woke with a mind still grappling with the confession of Dr. Eric Leidner revealed as Frederick Bosner, the man who had murdered his wife Louise, to protect the fragile edifice of his reinvented life. The expedition house, once alive with the hum of discovery, now stood as a monument to betrayal, its mud-brick walls absorbing the echoes of a tragedy that had shaken us all. The relentless sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the courtyard, as if to remind us that no secret could hide forever in its unforgiving light. I found Hercule Poirot in the living quarters, seated at the long table, his small hands arranging a collection of papers and objects, a photograph of Louise, the forged letter signed Frederick, a vial from Dr. Leidner's medical kit. His linen suit was immaculate, his mustache perfectly waxed, but his eyes held a quiet weariness, as if the act of unmasking a killer had left its mark. "Mademoiselle Leatherin," he greeted, his voice steady but soft, "the puzzle is solved, yet there are threads to tie. The truth, it is a tapestry, and we must ensure no stitch is left undone." His gaze lingered on the photograph, and I sensed a flicker of sadness beneath his usual composure. Breakfast was a ghostly affair. The team gathered in a silence broken only by the clink of cups and the rustle of the desert wind outside. Dr. Leidner was gone, taken to Baghdad by Captain Maitland for trial, his absence a palpable void. Miss Ann Johnson, her sharp features softened by exhaustion, picked at her bread, her eyes avoiding the empty chair where Leidner once sat. Mr. Joseph Mercado, his bandaged arm a reminder of his complicity, sat hunched, his nervous energy replaced by a defeated slump. Mr. Carey, the architect, maintained his stoic silence, his sunburned hands folded tightly, while Father Lavigny, his black robes stark against the dusty room, offered a prayer that seemed more for himself than the group. Poirot, at the table's head, sipped his coffee, his eyes moving over the team with a gentleness that belied his earlier intensity. After the meal, Poirot called the team together in the living quarters, the lamplight casting their faces in stark relief against the shadowed walls. "Mies Amos," he began, his voice clear and measured, "the killer of Madame Leidner has confessed, but there are questions yet unanswered. Let us tie the loose threads so that the truth may rest." His gaze swept the room, and I saw Miss Johnson's hands clench, Maricotho's eyes dart to the floor, and Kara's jaw tighten. Father Lavigny alone met Poirot's stare, his calm a shield I no longer trusted. Poirot turned first to the ghostly figure Miss Johnson had seen at Louise's window. "Mademoiselle," he said, his voice gentle but probing, "you saw a shadow, cloaked, moving in the dark. Why did you not speak sooner?" Miss Johnson's lips trembled, her voice low. "I was afraid it was Eric. I cared for him more than I should have. I couldn't bear to think he was involved." Poirot nodded, his eyes softening. "Love, mademoiselle, blinds us, but it also reveals." The figure was indeed Bosner, creating the illusion of a threat to torment his wife. He moved to the letter, signed Frederick, holding it up for all to see. This was no ghost's work, but a forgery by Bosner himself, crafted to mirror Madame Leidner's hand. He used her sketches, kept in this very room, to perfect the script. It was a cruel weapon, designed to break her spirit before her body. He turned to Mercado, whose face was pale. "Monsieur, you developed photographs for Bosner mages of these letters, perhaps to test their likeness. What did he promise you to ensure your silence?" Maricotha's voice was a whisper. He knew I'd taken artifacts, sold them to a dealer in Baghdad. He said he'd keep quiet if I helped him. I didn't know he'd kill her. Poirot's gaze shifted to Carrie, whose silence had been a constant presence. Monsieur, you suspected Bosner, did you not? Your loyalty to the expedition kept you silent, but you saw his agitation, his control over Madame Leidner. Carrie's eyes flickered, his voice gruff. I saw them argue, yes, about her past. I thought it was just a marriage spat. I didn't want to meddle. Poirot nodded. Loyalty is admirable, but silence can be a shield for guilt. Finally, he addressed Father Lavigny, whose calm had seemed unshakable. Monsieur Poirot said, his voice sharp, you are no monk, but a scholar. Hiding from a scandal in France, plagiarism, perhaps, or theft of credit. You knew Madame Leidner's fears, yet offered only platitudes. Why? Lavigny's fingers tightened on his cross, his voice steady but strained. My past is my own, Monsieur Poirot. I came here to study, not to judge. I had no part in her death. Poirot's eyes narrowed. No part, perhaps, but your silence aided the masquerade. You saw more than you say. He stepped back, addressing the group. The loose threads are tied. Bosner's plan was meticulous, the forged letters, the shadowed figure, the tampered bars, the sleeping draft, all to create an impossible crime. Yet the human heart betrays itself. His love for Madame Leidner was twisted by fear, and fear led to murder. The team sat in silence, their faces a mix of shame, relief, and grief. Miss Johnson's eyes glistened, Mercathaw's head bowed, and Kara's silence seemed heavier than ever. Lavigny's calm held, but his fingers betrayed a faint tremor. Poirot turned to me, his voice low. Nurse, the truth is a bitter medicine, but it heals. The expedition is broken, but life continues. He gathered his papers, the letter, the vial, and placed them in a small case. Captain Maitland will need these for the trial. Bosner's fate is now with the law. As the team dispersed, their steps heavy, I lingered, watching Poirot stand by the window, gazing at the dig site. The past, he said, almost to himself, is never truly buried. It rises, like the ruins, to demand its due. That afternoon, I packed my belongings, my time at Telluremia nearing its end. The house felt emptier, its purpose shattered by the weight of Bosner's confession. I passed Louise's room, its door still sealed, the blood stain on the bed, a grim reminder of her fate. The photograph of her and Leidner remained on the table, a relic of a love that had turned to poison. As I checked my lock one final time, I thought of Poirot's words, the heart's betrayal, the truth's healing. The desert stretched beyond, its secrets uncovered, but its scars enduring. And I wondered what future awaited those of us who had glimpsed its shadows. Chapter 12. The Desert's Justice. The 12th and final day at Tel Uremia dawned with a stillness that seemed to echo the resolution of the tragedy that had unfolded within the expedition house. The relentless Iraqi sun climbed high, casting sharp, unforgiving light across the mud-brick walls and the ancient ruins beyond, as if to lay bare every secret they had held. I, Amy Letherin, woke with a heavy heart, the weight of Frederick Bosner's confession, his true identity as Dr. Eric Leidner, and his murderer of his wife, Louise, still settling like the ever-present desert dust. The house, once a beacon of scholarly ambition, now stood as a hollow shell. Its occupants broken by the truth Hercule Poirot had unearthed. I found Poirot in the courtyard, his small figure silhouetted against the rising sun, his linen suit pristine, despite the dust that clung to everything else. He was packing a small case, his movements precise, his eyes distant yet alert. Mademoiselle Letherin, he greeted, his voice soft but carrying the quiet authority I had come to recognize. The case is closed, the truth revealed. Yet the desert, it keeps its own justice, Nan. His mustache twitched, and I sensed a melancholy beneath his usual composure, as if the act of solving a murder left scars even on his indomitable spirit. The team gathered for a final, somber breakfast, the air thick with the residue of grief and shame. Miss Ann Johnson, her sharp features softened by exhaustion, sat with her hands folded, her eyes avoiding the empty space where Dr. Leidner had once presided. Mr. Joseph Mercado, his bandaged arm, a testament to his complicity, ate mechanically, his nervous energy replaced by a defeated silence. Mr. Carey, the architect, maintained his stoic demeanor, his sunburned face unreadable, while Father Lavigny, his black robes stark against the dusty room, offered a prayer that felt like a farewell to the expedition itself. Poirot, at the table's head, sipped his coffee, his gaze moving over the team with a gentleness that spoke of closure rather than judgment. After the meal, Poirot addressed the group one last time, his voice clear and measured. Ms. Amos, the murder of Madame Leidner has been solved, the killer unmasked as Frederick Bosner, who lived among you as Dr. Leidner. His confession has tied the threads that forged letters, the shadowed figure, the tampered bars, the fatal sleeping draught. Yet justice is not only for the law, but for the soul. You each played a part, however small, in the silence that allowed this crime to flourish. His eyes swept the room, and I saw Miss Johnson's hands tremble, Merkatha's head bow, and Karis' jaw tighten. Lavigny's calm held, but his fingers paused on his cross, betraying a flicker of unease. Poirot turned to me, his voice low. Nurse, you have seen the heart of this tragedy. The desert buries its secrets, but it also reveals them to those who look closely. He gestured to the dig site, its trenches and ruins silent under the sun. Like these ancient walls, the human heart holds its past, and no lie can endure forever. His words lingered, a quiet epitaph for Louise and the expedition that had crumbled in her wake. Captain Maitland arrived mid-morning, his khaki uniform damp with sweat, to finalize the arrangements for Dr. Leidner's transfer to Baghdad. The team watched in silence as the motorcar drove away, its dust trail rising like a ghost against the horizon. Poirot stood apart, his small figure framed by the courtyard gate, his eyes fixed on the departing car. I joined him, my medical bag, packed, my time at Tel Yeremia at an end. Monsieur Poirot, I said, how do you bear it in covering such pain? He turned, his eyes softening. The truth, mademoiselle, is a heavy burden, but it is also a light. It frees, even as it wounds. The expedition dissolved quietly, its members scattering like the dust. Miss Johnson announced her intention to return to England, her voice hollow as she spoke of new work. Mercado, shamefaced, mumbled about joining another dig, his reputation tarnished. Carey, ever silent, packed his tools, his plans unspoken. Father Lavigny, revealed as a disgraced scholar, spoke of returning to France, his calm a mask for whatever regrets he carried. I too, prepared to leave, my role as nurse no longer needed, my heart heavy with the memories of Louise's fear and Bosner's betrayal. As I packed my belongings, I passed Louise's room one last time, its door now unsealed, the bloodstain cleaned but the memory indelible. The photograph of her and Leidner had been removed, perhaps by Miss Johnson, leaving the table bare. I thought of her golden hair, her haunted eyes, and the love that had turned to poison in the desert's heat. Poirot joined me, his case in hand, ready for his own departure. Nurse, he said, the heart is more complex than any cuneiform tablet. It buries its truths deep, but they rise, always. We walked to the courtyard, where a motor car waited, to take me to Baghdad. Poirot tipped his hat, his small figure a stark contrast to the vast desert beyond. Adieu, mademoiselle, he said, his voice carrying a quiet warmth. You have been a fine witness to the truth. As the car pulled away, I watched him vanish into the heat haze, his work done, his presence a fleeting spark in the endless sands. The ruins of Tel Yeremia receded, their secrets laid bare, but the desert's justice, as Poirot had said, lingered. In the silence, a reminder that no truth could remain buried forever.